Hello, everybody, and welcome to this special edition of Pick Six Podcast. We're going to have more of these where we have more during the course of the week. Sam McKewon along with Evan Bland here. We're going to talk a little Nebraska baseball. Off to a rough start, 0-3-1 out in San Diego. They play South Alabama this weekend, so we're going to kind of go over everything that's going on with the Nebraska baseball program early in this season. I want to remind everybody to check out the Even Field podcast on the Omaha World-Herald. It has a spotlight focus on women and girls sports, and with Josie Whalen and Eileen Mesler, and it'll be good for people to kind of check it out. It has just sort of a unique spin, and it's feature focused, so there'll be more on the athletes and who power the teams that we all love to watch. So check out the Even Field podcast. All right, Evan. Nebraska baseball 0-3-1 after the start of the season down in San Diego. They lost just about every which way you could. They had a game where they didn't hit the ball very well. They had a game that they blew. And then they had the bizarre game on Monday that I think you described as, what did you say? Unholy?
It was an unholy spectacle. And it was.
Seven inning tie. Okay, so we'll get to that game in a minute. But I want to start with this. Going into the season, and you wrote a lot of good preview stories, what was the expectation that they had going into the season, and how was that not seen or seen in the opening weekend?
Well, it was flipped on its head on the opening weekend. Coaches and players looked at what they had done in fall and in the spring, and they felt like, yeah, we have some pitching depth here. I can't tell you how many times I heard this reminder that they had like 3 or 4 former Friday night starters who would be coming out of the bullpen. Michael Garza and Shea Shanneman and Kyle Perry and Brett Sears. And it didn't manifest. I think the starting pitchers were decent. I think you can definitely build on that with what you saw. All of them at least went into the 5th. But they could not, for the life of them, find anybody other than Jalen Worthley, a freshman from Lincoln East, to get big outs in a high-leverage big spot. And the most glaring of it all, of course, were the walks, the hit batters. There were a couple balks that factored in heavily into the outcome too.
And then, like on Monday, high leverage. They're up 16-10. They have a 6-run lead. There's no high leverage.
Not at that point.
But you know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
They weren't even able to get it done with a 6-run lead.
No. And you give up 6, and it wasn't a walk-off technically, but it was a tie. You give up 6 to tie in 7 innings. I mean, what a ridiculous, gross finish to 4 days on the West Coast. But offensively, I think that's, if you want to talk about the positive side, I think that's where you have to start. What we'd all heard about Dylan Carey, the freshman third baseman, absolutely came to pass on opening weekend. A couple home runs. Will Bolt said he essentially forced their hand in moving him up the lineup. He started in the 7 hole and ended the weekend in the 2 spot. And so I think there's the depth that the coaches felt like they had through at least one weekend was validated. So I think you're encouraged by that. Defensively, they only committed 2 errors on the weekend. That really wasn't the reason why they lost any of the games. So you can point to some things to be encouraged by, but it's, again, you go to South Alabama this weekend, and if you have to answer the question of who do you trust in a 1-run game late, after that first weekend, there's just not a ton of confidence. So, essentially you have to bank on track record of some of these guys, and you have to sort of hope that it was an opening weekend jitters sort of situation. So, it's an interesting spot where you have to sort of see what happened and judge the team accordingly, but also you don't want to overreact knowing that you've got 51 regular season baseball games left to go. So it's the results weren't what you're looking for, but if the bullpen sort of becomes what it looked like it could be and what some of their backgrounds suggest it could be, then, I think you can paint a picture that Nebraska can turn things around, as we head into March.
So early in the Erstad tenure, I think maybe the first year, you'll have to help me out if the second year went this way too. Nebraska's pitchers did struggle to just attack the strike zone. There's just no other way to put it. They and this was very true in the end of the Mike Anderson era was very disappointing. You know, they had, I think, one pitcher in Michael Marriott that was pretty good, maybe a couple other guys, but the last couple of years of the Anderson era, I mean, they were giving up 20 and 17, and they just didn't attack the strike zone. A lot of that was built up on walks, and then you get in a situation where you got 2 or 3 guys on base, you have to throw strikes, and all of a sudden you've burned your arm out, and you're giving up bombs. I thought last year Nebraska, and frankly for the entirety of the Bolt era, they've done a really good job of just throwing strikes, generally speaking. What happened this weekend? Is it just first weekend jitters?
I think that's what they're working through right now. I mean, Shea Shanneman was tabbed as their closer and came in a couple of those spots, and he's had points in his career where control has eluded him or things have snowballed a little bit. So, you wonder what that's like. Bolt mentioned a lot of guys came in messy situations that escalated quickly, like that Monday game. Shanneman couldn't find the strike zone late, and all of a sudden Mason Ornelas is up warming up, and he comes in having to warm up in like 60 seconds because it didn't look like he was going to be needed, but then it was walk, hit by pitch, and boom, suddenly he's in the game. So I think that was part of it. I think San Diego actually is going to be a pretty good team. They were in a regional last year. They're going to contend in the West Coast Conference, which is a decent baseball conference. But yeah, I mean, you have to figure it out when the bullets are live. That's what they always say. And baseball's sort of tricky in that way, right? Like you can have command of the strike zone in the bullpen or behind the scenes, but it's just different when you've got a live batter up there. Sort of like golf, right? Like you can hit off the tee pretty well if you're on the range, but if you got a gallery of folks watching you, it's just a little bit different. And you're right. Like Nebraska traditionally in the Big Ten era has found the strike zone. And I heard from a lot of fans this last weekend about fire the pitching coach and all this. You know what? Last year, despite the team's struggles, the pitching was the best part of what Nebraska did.
Well, it's been good for 2 years.
And that's despite a lot of the injuries that they had. So I think, the injuries obscured some of that.
What was their ERA last year? It was good.
It was in the low 4s.
Yeah,
they were
pretty good.
They were
for
top 70
baseball.
ERA last year. Yeah, it's been an asset.
Now, what I thought was different this weekend is, so Shanneman has that situation on Monday. But I just feel like there were opportunities other than Worthley, and they did not appear to be anywhere near the strike zone. You can throw strikes if throwing strikes is an absolute priority. If you're not worried about the other batter, and you know that you gotta trust your defense. Do they have a short porch in San Diego? Was there some concern that they were going to take a bunch out? Because that didn't seem to be the weekend story.
No, not really. I mean, it's a standard park.
It's not Iowa.
Weather was fine. It's like, I don't know. It's confounding. It's like Nebraska basketball with free throws. Like, just make them. Just practice it more and make them, right? Just throw strikes. But there was a mental component for whatever reason in the opening weekend. Last year, I went back and looked last year when they went to Sam Houston State. It wasn't quite as pronounced in terms of the walks and the plunked batters, but it was not good. And that followed up into the next weekend and sort of set the tone until they smoothed things out in Big Ten play. So I'll be curious, one, who they trust in those big spots, because the starters are still building up and you're probably not going to go more than 5 or 6. So who do you trust? But then, can you just throw it over the plate and trust? Like I thought, I think it was Jace Kaminska made a good point. Like at some point you have to trust that good hitters are still going to get themselves out. They're going to swing at a pitch, and they're going to miss it by a half an inch, and they're going to ground it out. So you have to put it over the plate. You have to trust your defense. You have to trust your stuff. And it's easier said than done. And you really don't know until the games happen. Like, you can have all the bullpens you want, but I'll be curious if it was an opening weekend aberration or if this thing continues on. Now,
I can be completely wrong on this, and I probably am. I think that a team gets so much of who it is, its identity, by its pitchers. Like, I certainly, great offenses are great, and don't get me wrong, but there's very little that's more demoralizing within the context of a game than a staff that walks people over and over. Because the offense is like, we're only going to be successful 1/3 of the time.
Right.
If you're creating a scenario where that team is successful 1/2 of the time or 2/3 of the time because you're not putting them in position to make a mistake or to fail, because baseball is a game of failure, It's demoralizing. So, like, I appreciated what Will Bolt said. I think it was after the first game, maybe the second game, about the offense. It was his first game because he was thrown out of the second game, wasn't he?
The third
was
game,
thrown.
I think he was thrown out.
And, like, I know you've had the thought process of, well, you know, that their hitting was bad last year, which is true. It was historically bad, and they need to fix some of that. But I mean, early in a season, playing down there when you really haven't played baseball, don't you kind of expect that?
Well, here's a number, and I put this in my scouting.
And they hit better as the weekend went on. They hit well.
Nebraska's in February under Will Bolt. You want to take a guess what their record is? Did you happen to see that?
I did not.
Okay. What do you think?
So just general, I'll give you like a winning percentage because I don't know how many games
Nebraska
they played.
games in February. This is Will Bolt's fourth year because
he played all the February
games.
games.
2020 games, yeah, in February.
Winning percentage of 40%.
No, 2-16-1. 2 wins, 16 losses, 1 tie. Will Bolt, Nebraska baseball teams in February. So, yeah, 2 wins. Does that surprise you?
Yeah. Being that bad?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
I would have said 6 and 13, which
Yeah.
isn't good either.
Which is not great. But
what is that?
It speaks
I think
to,
that's just winter teams having to go and
that's
play
part
down.
of it. And it speaks to the level of team that they schedule. You think about they played Baylor. That includes TCU last year.
It does.
That includes Arizona State in 2020. That was a good team then. So I think that's part of it too. Is you have to.
San Diego's sneaky good. That was a hard.
You have to recognize kind of what the situation is a little bit. On the other end of it, you look around the Big Ten. The only team that was undefeated in the Big Ten last weekend was Iowa, and they're playing, Indiana State and Quinnipiac.
What did Maryland do?
They won their series against South Florida, and then they lost in midweek to West Virginia.
Mm.
But my point being that Nebraska's in a tough spot because you can schedule tough like they have, and if you win a couple of those games, you're in great shape with your RPI. If you don't, it's tough to make up for that. Or you can schedule how Iowa tends to, which is to play other northern teams at some neutral location. But their situation at the end of every year has been, their record's pretty good, but their RPI stinks, and they're always on the wrong side of the bubble. So,
yep.
Yeah, Nebraska has to kind of figure that out. Either
Rutgers got burned last year doing that. Lost
exactly.
to UNO.
Yeah, exactly. So you got to find a way to either start hotter, or stack wins, and hope that you can make it up in the Big Ten. So that's kind of where they are at with that.
Okay. We'll end with this. South Alabama this weekend, they're 4-1. They haven't played terribly distinguishing teams. Eastern Kentucky, they lost to them. Then they beat them 26-6. Beat Nicholls State. I don't know who else they beat. They're playing smaller schools. But South Alabama's not terrible in baseball.
No, they're not. They're a good team at home. Historically, a decent Sun Belt team. Like you said, that 26-6 game, they had 20 walks. So, who knows what they are offensively? It's hard to say.
Yeah.
They have a couple good pitchers, though, and I think that'll test what Nebraska does. And you look ahead to next weekend when they play in Vanderbilt and Ole Miss and Hawaii up in Minneapolis. This is still part of that stretch when you're on the road where you really either bank some wins and build that resume or you get exposed. And so I think it's another sneaky big weekend before they come back to Haymarket Park, where historically then they start racking up some wins against the Northern Colorados of the world and some of your other non-cons. But this weekend and next weekend is obviously big. This weekend I think is sneaky big if they want to get on track here before coming home.
Will Bolt's tone in the post games, which I listened to and you quoted on Twitter, were angry, and to me, anger often connotes surprise. Is that accurate?
Yes.
That was unexpected.
Yes. He said as much, especially about the pitching on Wednesday when we spoke with him. He's like, yeah, that's not the pitching group that we've seen. And he ended one of those quotes. That was in the Monday game when he just was looking at the box and he's like, 16 runs on 7 hits. And just muttering it, just how disgusting is that? And it was because of the walks and
well, he basically started saying he was going to pull guys.
Sure.
That was the quote. You're not going to be out there. And that's a Dave Van Horn thing, by the way, for people who are listening. Dave Van Horn used to pull guys fast at Nebraska. Now Dave Van Horn has maybe the best pitching staff in America every other year at Arkansas, so he doesn't have to do it. But to Van Horn's notable credit, he cared about that a great deal. Like that's a big deal to him, and he's built a program that's built on, loving up the pitchers. I don't know if Nebraska is that way. I think Nebraska. Here's the thing. I say that the offense isn't as important as the pitching, but simultaneously, I think Nebraska in the baseball under Will Bolt needs to be a team that scores a lot of runs. Because I don't see a program that's like outside of the 2 years ago when they had a bunch of older guys. I just don't know that they're going to be like a pitching dominant team. They need to score runs.
We'll see. I mean, when they've done well, their best teams have been pitching and defense.
They have.
And the offense has been good enough. So I think they think that it's easier to find pitchers and coach them up than it is to find a lineup full of impact bats.
Mm-hmm.
So, only a handful of teams can do what LSU does and TCU does.
Or
and all
Arkansas
those teams,
does.
Or Arkansas, in terms of the offense and how they can staff.
Yes, that's true.
So, I think
Iowa finds a way, though.
well,
They're pretty good on
They
offense.
have elite pitching. Like
Iowa
elite
has good
pitching.
offense often years, though.
Yeah, they're all right. But, I mean, I think part of it's an identity thing. Like, you can't change that year to year. You can't be really good at pitching one year and then stink and try to outscore everybody. Like, I think they believe pitching and defense is going to rule the day. The offense will come along and they'll figure it out as they go. But I do think that'll be an asset this year. So it's an interesting dynamic.
All right. That is the Pick Six podcast for this week. For Evan, I'm Sam. We'll be back next week to talk more about Husker football, Husker men's basketball, and who knows, maybe Nebraska baseball will get a sweep of the Jaguars. Thanks a lot, Husker fans.